All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, 3 months ago, there were people who were ready to run Florida football head coach Billy Napier out of Gainesville. But in less than 90 days, things have changed for Napier and his Florida program. The Gators have gone from being a team that some people believed was one of the worst in the Southeastern Conference to becoming bowl eligible and now finishing with a winning record for the first time since 2020. So, of course, the question is going to be where did this turnaround for Napier begin? And honestly, I think it started after the Texas A&M game because you look at the way that this season began for Florida. They got destroyed at home by Miami, and who knew back then that Miami would be what Miami did be this season? Okay, clearly they beat Sanford the following Saturday, but then the Saturday after that, they hosted Texas A&M, and the Aggies dominated them. And who knew what the Aggies would be as well? But nonetheless, the Boo Birds were out. We saw a lot of Florida faithful leaving Ben Hill Griffin Stadium early in those games. We saw Billy Napier get booed off the field at halftime during the Texas A&M game, booed even more at the culmination of that game. But nonetheless, you know what? Billy Napier owned it, and he took it as a challenge for both him and his team to get better. I think getting the wins over Mississippi State and UCF were big after that. And even in defeat, Florida going on the road back in October and giving Tennessee all that they could handle. They had opportunities to win that game, but they just didn't finish. And I think one big turning point for Napier was when he went to DJ Lagway at quarterback. Of course, Graham Mertz was a stopgap guy, got him in the transfer portal. But nonetheless, DJ Lagway was his guy, and you saw how different that the offense looked with Lagway at quarterback in comparison to Mertz. And then, of course, the vote of confidence from AD Scott Strickland a little bit later on. And that came around the time when Florida went to Jacksonville, lost to Georgia 34-20. But the final score of that game was not indicative of how close that it was because the Gators were winning prior to the DJ Lagway injury. And then, of course, he could have played against Texas. They kept him out. That was a tough game for the Gators. But then at 4-5, just really everything coming together. And, it's one of those when a team works hard, they want, to see some rewards for their hard work. And I think their biggest reward came in the LSU game. When they went out there, they knocked off a ranked team and they got the 500. And that got people believing, saying, hey, you know what? Napier was the guy for Florida. Napier was going to get this team to being bowl eligible. And not only has he done that, the Gators have a winning record. They won their last three. They beat LSU. They beat Ole Miss. And then, of course, they beat up on Florida State. They added to Florida State's misery last night. But you just look at what they did in the process because LSU and Ole Miss ranked teams, and they basically ended the playoff hopes for the Tigers, and they put the playoff hopes for Ole Miss on life support. And you look at Florida, one of, if not the toughest schedules in the nation. And for everything that I'm talking about, five teams that Florida faced are still alive to get to the college football playoff. Georgia and Texas are there, in my opinion. Ole Miss has an opportunity. Tennessee, I do believe, is in, and I think Miami has an opportunity as well. And even with Texas A&M, had they have won last night at home against Texas, they're going to the SEC championship game. So that's just how difficult that this schedule was for Florida. And just breaking down a month of November without a Saturday off, Georgia in Jacksonville. You're in Austin to take on Texas. You're home for LSU and Ole Miss back to back. And then you finished up last night with Florida State, albeit things have clearly not gone the way that the Seminoles wanted them to go this season. But nonetheless, I think all of those things, really factored into this, and with winning, when you start to win, you start to believe in yourself. And then, of course, guys are buying in to what Billy Napier is selling. So you look at everything. And again, Napier embraced, Florida's tough road in their schedule. They have one of the youngest teams in college football, and it's one of those that it is going to pay off, I do believe, in the long term for this program. Now, did Florida, before Scott Strickland making that announcement as far as sticking with Napier, did Florida possibly look at possible replacements for Napier? Possibly, possibly. You never know. Maybe, they just wanted to check the temperature, maybe, just hypothetically speaking. But at the end of the day, I think Scott Strickland hit the nail on the head because he said, listen, it's tough to, have success and have consistency when you are consistently starting over. Jim McElwain won 19 games in his first 2 years at Florida. Started off 3-4 in 2017 and was let go. Dan Mullen, okay, won 29 games in his first 3 years in Gainesville, went 5-6 in 2021, was let go. You can't consistently want to sit out there if you want to hang with the big boys in the Southeastern Conference and you're consistently starting over at the head coach position. And now, with Florida showing their commitment to Billy Napier, it's going to give him the opportunity needed to build his program. And we're seeing it because in the last couple of weeks, we've seen Napier be able to flip some commitments, some 4 and 5 star commitments from other schools. And that's going to be important because now he has 3 years under his belt. So now we're starting to see the fruits of the labor, if you will, as far as recruiting kids, as far as developing that talent and having them ready to hang with the top teams in that tough and rugged Southeastern Conference. The Gators, of course, they're going to a bowl game now. So they get those 15 additional practices for the preparation, which is going to be huge for Napier's program heading into 2025. And of course, it's all about keeping up with the Joneses in the Southeastern Conference. And I'm talking about the recruiting because you just look at it to give you an idea of how tough the things are in this 16 team SEC. Auburn and Oklahoma, premier programs in the nation. Both of them just went 2-6 in the Southeastern Conference. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of how tough that league is, how important it is to recruit. And I think not just the recruiting, you have to accept and you have to embrace the transfer portal. And I think if Florida can find, a couple of guys in that portal this year, especially along with the way that Napier recruits, that transfer portal could just be the cherry on the top as Florida and Napier look to ascend and get back among the big boys in college football. Of course, the NILs as well, because we talked about this. The NILs are game changers at the collegiate level. And if your NIL program ain't there, guess what? You're not going to get the quality kids that you need for your program. But at the end of the day, this is why you don't um, you don't give up on a head coach real quick. Uh, Ryan Brown, how you doing? You're saying I got your attention. I'm gonna look you up for the content. Definitely, appreciate the support. Please feel free to check out this channel, like and subscribe it, and subscribe to it. And definitely, once again, I appreciate the support. Hang in there if you want to chime in with anything else. But definitely, you can't give up on a head coach. And I get it that people want to see success right away. And I think the biggest thing that has hurt Florida's program, or one of the biggest things, in my opinion, that has hurt Florida's program in recent years has been the success of Georgia, has been the success of the Alabamas. You can't worry about what Georgia is doing. You can't worry about what Alabama has done under, legendary head coach Nick Saban. Okay, it's one of those you got to focus on your program, and I understand where the Florida fan base is coming from because you go back to the Steve Spurrier days in the 1990s. The Gators absolutely dominated the Southeastern Conference. You might as well have called Atlanta, where the SEC championship game is, Gainesville North. Okay, I totally get it. And then you look at what Urban Meyer did in his 5 years at Florida, two national championships. The Gators were consistently a top five program. I totally get it. Florida, they have not had that consistent success since then. And the Florida fans want to get back there. And I think the Gators definitely have the potential to do that. You look at the talent rich state of Florida. You look at the ability to recruit in the Southeastern Conference, bring those kids in to your facility, bring those kids into your program. The Gators definitely have everything set up. So you're looking at it right now. I know that Billy Napier's had to answer, his fair share of questions as far as Flaggate, Tallahassee style from last night, and of course there was a lot of that going on. All over college football yesterday. I've talked about it, and I'll say it again. At some point, sooner rather than later, I do expect the conferences and the NCAA to address the planting of the flag issue. But nonetheless, I think if you are Florida, you have a ton of confidence for yourself. Those additional practices for this young team cannot be talked about enough because that's going to be big for Napier and his program going forward. This is the first time, okay, since Billy Napier took over at Florida, that the Gators are not going to finish with a losing record overall and not a losing record within the SEC. And I mean, Florida just went 4-4 in the SEC. And you look at those four losses: A&M, Tennessee, Georgia, and Texas. And like I said, three of those four teams, in my opinion, are already in the college football playoff for tournament. So when it's all said and done, you survived it. It's kind of like I would liken it to a lower tier or a mid major um college basketball program, having a tough, hard nosed, out of conference schedule to get them ready for their conference slate. And then, of course, they might have a lower seed when the NCAA tournament comes around, but those kids are ready to play because of the quality of play that they have faced. Now, granted, college football, you know, is a lot different because you know what, the conference schedules are made, and again in the SEC, there really isn't an off day. And Ryan, definitely to your point, I had talked about it earlier, and I'm going to say it again, my man. Listen, that Georgia Florida game, the tenor of that contest changed once Lagway got injured. Okay, and that was a big difference in that game. Florida was definitely sniffing upset, and once Lagway got injured, it's kind of like Georgia, they were able to breathe a sigh of relief. As everything just simply came together for them, and of course, Georgia's defense hasn't been as stellar as people are accustomed to in years past. Just look at Friday night against Georgia Tech. That's a whole nother subject for another day. But it's one of those where, again, going into Knoxville, like I said before, and they were right there. They just couldn't get over the hump against Tennessee. And now you're looking back on it, and if you're Florida, you got to say, listen, we definitely got something right here. So I'm looking at this Florida team. I'm looking at Billy Napier and what he has brought to the table. And I think also the other important thing is this everybody at Florida, or the powers that be at Florida, nonetheless, sticking with Napier. So you look at it, they're going to get their bowl game. It's just a matter of where they're going to be going. On top of that, it's never too early to look ahead to next year. They're going to be in Miami to take on the Hurricanes. We know that they got Georgia in Jacksonville next year. We know that they're this time around they're going to get Florida State, in the swamp, and of course it's one of those, I guarantee you, Mike Norvell didn't forget, as far as how things went down last night. But nonetheless, you're looking at Florida's four road games in the SEC next year: at Kentucky, at LSU, at Ole Miss, and at A&M. Of course, none of those places are easy to play. And then for homes, they got Mississippi State, they've got Tennessee, and they also have Texas. So, again, but like I said before, there really aren't that many off days in the Southeastern Conference. But if you're Florida, again, from where this team was in September to now, I think the improvement I truly do believe that the transformation is kind of like night and day from where they were. But again, that's why you have to preach patience and you have to preach understanding. Everybody's not going to be Nick Saban. They're not going to come in and just be able to snap that finger. Ryan, you're saying Stoops might be gone next year or so. Mark my words. I'll tell you like this. Kentucky went 4-8 this year, I do believe. He's made a living, hanging around 6-6 and 7-5, and has been able to keep his job. I do remember him talking about the lack of NILs and the lack of funding for Kentucky football. Clearly, we know it's not the same for basketball in Lexington, but nonetheless, like I said before, the NILs definitely are a game changer. And if you don't have things up to speed, you're not going to be able to keep up. Kentucky in recent years, has given the Gators a run for their money. But I think we're about to get a back Florida wise on one of those Steve Spurrier runs as far as the domination of a team like Kentucky goes. But nonetheless, like I said before, big step in the right direction for Florida. Let's see where they go bowl season, getting those extra practices and looking to build off of that. And then Napier has shown he can recruit. And I think now it's all coming together for him. And also another thing that's going to be interesting for me, granted, UCF doesn't get those top tier recruits from Florida. But now, Miles Zahn leaving UCF to become the offensive coordinator at Florida State, albeit that the hot seat was starting to heat up for him in Orlando. Let's see how that affects recruiting in the Sunshine State as well. But nonetheless, Florida, I think they're starting to get it back. I'm not going to sit up there and say, well, the Gators are ready to be a top 10 program again. No, but they're starting to get things turned around. It's not how you start, but it's how you finish. And this Florida team, they rolled up their sleeves, led by their head coach. They rolled up their sleeves, they fought, they scrapped, and they clawed. And coming down the stretch, you could make a case that Florida was playing some of the best football in the nation. So credit to them and credit to Napier for working his tail off to get things turned around. And let's see if he can build off of that because they finished strong this year. They still can't afford, to come in next year and take a step back. But I do truly believe that they will be able to build off of this. I do believe DJ Lagway as a star. I think even today, Ryan, please feel free to comment. I don't know how much that you follow Florida recruiting, but I do believe that they just were able to get another recruit to flip to their program. We've seen it a couple in like the last 2 weeks or so. So I think the kid that they got that they were able to flip today, I do believe was a 4-star guy. So you know what? They're starting to get those recruits coming back to Gainesville. There you go. Okay, that's his name right there. Yeah. So that's the thing. You're starting to get the kids coming back to Gainesville. The wins are starting to come. And then also the next thing that's going to help to build the program clearly. We know about the NILs, we know about the facilities, but the cherry on top is how many kids are you sending to the National Football League? Because, there was a time, we consistently heard, Florida Gators going first, second, third, fourth round. We haven't heard that probably in like the last 7, 8 years consistently, maybe like one or two guys every single year. But nonetheless, once they are able to get back to that aspect, as far as saying, hey, you know what? You look at what these guys are doing come April. You look at what these guys are doing late February and March when we have our pro day. Look at how many scouts are coming down here to see our guys. Look at how many guys are getting their names called early on in the NFL draft. That's definitely a big sell for your program as well. Because I granted, the top tier guys, the 4 and 5 star kids, it's not just about college. They want to have that ability to play on Sundays. And if you're able to get them up and get them ready for that, that's the cherry on the top for your program. But nonetheless, big finish from Florida in comparison to where they were. Credit to Billy Napier. You're saying Pearsall from ASU, and I wouldn't be surprised if Elijah Badger goes high second round. Definitely, definitely. You speaking of Pearsall, we saw Ricky Pearsall. come out of Florida's program. And to me, I think he was an underrated wide receiver coming out of college. Of course, he had that unfortunate incident, after being drafted by the San Francisco 49ers. Thank goodness that young man does have the opportunity to compete in the National Football League after, being shot. But nonetheless, you look at that guy and what he's doing in the NFL. And of course, Florida can get back to that, with the wide receivers. You think about, some of the history, even going back to the Steve Spurrier days with the Ike Hilliards of the world and the Reedell Anthony's, and of course that fun and gun offense and what he was able to do with a lot of talent defensively as well, sending the likes of Kevin Carter and so many others to the National Football League. Florida needs to get back to that. We saw it with Urban Meyer and what he did in a very, very quick time in Gainesville. Florida's a big state, and it's also a talent-rich state when it comes to football. You got to fight with the Miamis and the Florida States of the world. You got to fight with the Georgias and Alabamas and Clemsons of the world. But I think the Gators can do it. Napier's a hell of a recruiter, and so far, so good for them in 2024. But nonetheless, strong finish from the Gators. Let's see where they're going to end up come bowl season. Let's see if they can finish, put the cherry on the top, if you will, with a bowl win. Hopefully, for their sake, it carries over to even more success come 2025. But, folks, that's going to wrap it up. And I want to take this time to thank each and every one of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. If you like what you heard and saw on this podcast this evening, feel free to hit that like button as well as subscribing to this channel. Ryan Brown, definitely appreciate the support. Definitely appreciate you chiming in. I got a lot to talk about this week, college football. So definitely keep your eyes and ears peeled or on this channel, and keep your eyes and ears peeled as far as more podcasts coming out talking about the doings of college football. There's a lot going on this week, conference championship game wise, a lot that still has to be decided as far as determining who's going to get to that college football playoff. So let's see what happens this week. But nonetheless, there's still plenty to talk about. But like I said, if you liked what you saw and heard, please feel free to hit that like button as well as subscribing to this channel. If you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it will be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. And you can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off, and I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.